of people who went against the grain.
It was crucial to their future to be in the classroom.
We're actually safer as a result of being in school.
Courageous Leadership Through Crisis. Live from the Blue Bear Cafe, this is Voices of Courage.
All right, I'm here today with my friend Freebird McKinney, who was State Teacher of the Year. Freebird, welcome. You want to tell the audience a little bit about your journey from the classroom to what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Morrison. It's been quite a journey. I was a social studies high school teacher for 17 years. Primarily world history was my favorite subject, ninth grade world history. I also taught AP Euro, AP World, and IB philosophy. In 2018, I had the incredible, great fortune and opportunity to be named the North Carolina State Teacher of the Year. And in our state, you're provided a sabbatical, in essence, to travel around, to listen, to learn. You serve on the State Board of Education and have opportunities to serve on other boards and coalitions and commissions. And it's just an incredible opportunity to learn everything that there is to know about North Carolina public schools. And when that year is over, it's kind of difficult to put all of those experiences kind of back into the bottle. And so I was given the opportunity. um, uh, every Tuesday I would spend in Raleigh learning about policy, learning about the General Assembly, learning about the inner workings of the board and the department. And just I wanted to learn whatever I could in that time. So my mentor, Cecilia Holden, who's now the president of my future NC, kind of groomed me into a role as director of government community affairs for the state. Excuse me. And that role allowed me to be a liaison between the General Assembly, the Department of Public Instruction, and the State Board of Education. But I really wanted that role to be more of an educator diplomat, of an ambassador that goes around the state and learns and listens and then takes those stories back to the policymakers and the decision makers. I firmly believe that the answer to every one of our challenges exists in a classroom or in a school already. It's just how do we get that information and get that back to the decision makers and allow that story to be the centerpiece of how we move forward. And now I'm getting to follow my passions in global education as the director of partnership development for Participate Learning, which focuses on providing global education opportunities to each and every student possible. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today and to share some other stories about what I've learned and listened to across this state.
Did you ever think as a teacher you'd be doing all these roles that you're now in?
Yeah, no, not in the roles. I had some incredible experiences as a teacher, taking students around the world every summer and working in teacher leadership academies and building student leadership academies. So we had some incredible opportunities that transcended the four walls of a classroom, but never in these roles per se. No.
Yes, and so new leaders, that may just be starting out from the classroom, they need to widen their horizons. That's one of the best things they can do.
Mhm.
Um, get out there and visit other countries. Go see
Yep.
what education looks like in other states. Visit
Yep.
other schools. Grow your circle bigger than it starts out with. So I love the quote. COVID didn't shut down schools. Educators just kept going all hands on deck. The real
Mhm.
voices of courage were the teams that got the kids back, reached out to the kids, visited the kids, set up avenues for the kids to keep learning, and got them back in the buildings. And that champion for children had never been the role like it was in COVID. We are champions every day, but in COVID,
Yeah.
it was like superheroes. Like that was the cape we were wearing. Children will remember educators because we helped them through the largest struggle of their young lives. And COVID kids will always be known from this generation as the kids who faced a worldwide pandemic and overcame that. So I really appreciate the fact that you said teachers were the COVID keepers.
That's
I
it.
think that is so important. And this generation has already overcame so much. My friend Ricky Robertson says, we shouldn't teach them to have a deficit mindset when these children have already overcome a worldwide pandemic. Anything you want to elaborate on that quote? I just thought it was amazing.
No, and I feel like because so many of us that were in policy during the time and even now never actually taught in a classroom and maybe didn't even lead as a principal or as a superintendent during COVID, right? And I think that's such an important piece to understand is listen to those who are on the front line, who are having to make very, very rapid, flexible, resilient decisions, and who literally shepherded these students through this crisis. Like again, and I think one of the initiatives that we started it was called District Visits and Voices, and it was to get out even during COVID, because like minor city schools, you didn't shut down. And that was this misnomer in Raleigh, is that schools are shut down. And I'm like, no, schools are not shut down, whether or not you're still going in person or whether or not you're conducting online education. Like schools are not shut down. The physical building might be, but everything that's going on, and we need to lift that up and highlight that. And then for those that are paralyzed in this state and this decision making process because they're fearful that they may put students and staff in dangerous situations, lift up those examples like minor city schools, like Perquimans, like areas that we're still doing everything in their power to have those kids in school, to have those staff there in safe situations, but to transcend this the impact of this crisis in their own individual, regional, local ways.
Yeah, in DC and in corporate headquarters, they didn't come back to their offices sometimes for 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
We were back in 2 or 3 months. So
Yeah.
our why really drives us to do that. And one of the things that came out of the Voices of Courage paper is really this: how can we be better? How can we
Mm-hmm.
not waste a pandemic that happened to us to change the future for us, for our children? How can we be better? I think, what you talked about with the School Without Walls, you talk about that before the pandemic. You knew that needed to be, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
vision or a dream of every educator. Get them out, go on field trips, travel places, learn from others, Zoom experts into your classroom. That's one that everybody can kind of get their head wrapped around. But what about this whole, what if there would be flexibility for staff? What if they could work from
Yeah.
home, or they could work remotely, or they could work different places and still be doing the job that they are doing, but give them, some flexibility? Maybe let a teacher teach half a day and coach other teachers the other half of the day. Let's think about what we had to do in COVID. We immediately co-taught on Zoom calls with our teams. What are these public-private partnerships that we have created during COVID that we could keep going with? So, for instance, the ABC Science Collaborative was this huge group of epidemiologists that we Zoomed with every week, and particularly Mount Airy and the Northwest superintendents who were coming back before anyone in the country. And I found it really interesting. I didn't know this. The lead for the ABC Science Collaborative, this national health collaborative, but he was on Anderson Cooper, and he said, Kim, I remembered a conversation I'd had with you that we were going to do this. We were going to come back, and we proved it in COVID. So when this variant was coming around, Anderson Cooper was asking him, so do you think schools can keep going? And he was like, absolutely. Like, the answer is yes. So I just find that interesting that, this person I didn't know, this doctor who's on Anderson Cooper, remembers a conversation with me about schools can come back and here's how we're safely going to do that. He is
Mm-hmm.
now leading us through some conversations about the mental health crisis. Like, we can do this. Every child can be well mentally and physically, and we can provide
Yeah.
avenues to help with that. So, what are maybe one or two ideas you have about how to be better coming out of this crisis?
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because when I think about how do we kind of come out of this better, there's two ways. And I was literally in a classroom yesterday in Union County at East Elementary School. And I walk in the classroom and there's one teacher, they were co-teaching. There's one teacher at an oval shape and she had about 4 or 5 students. Another teacher over in the other corner with about 4 or 5 students. But then throughout the room, there was a group of 4 students working together on something. There was one student who had headphones and was on a computer working. There was another without headphones on a computer working. Then there were 3 others over here who had what they were working on. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what a remarkable change and difference in how a classroom looks right now. And we discover new ways that I feel like that students adapted to learning that we just hadn't really put into practice, to now where we have this even in one singular classroom, these diverse, differentiated ways of teaching and learning. We've absolutely, it has changed our companies, the way that we use Zoom and the way that we use online instruction, but at the same time, it still lifts up the need to have that face-to-face interaction as well. So the hybridization of how we can use teaching and learning with those face-to-face opportunities, but also the advantages that we have using digital teaching and learning resources, I think is a huge one. The second one, and you mentioned this a little bit, is, man, our students have already overcome and triumphed over this. They were doing it day to day. Our staff was doing it day to day. The competencies that we realize now after I think the pandemic, and business and industry leaders are saying, we need competencies like empathy. We need competencies like critical thinking and problem solving. We need competencies like communication, flexibility. Like, these are now becoming the focus pieces of what we want our students when they graduate in North Carolina Public High School to have. And I think they were so set up because of the rapidity of how they had to be flexible in their experience in school, how they had to communicate in very different ways, how they had to develop a whole new level of empathy for how families and how their colleagues and how their friends were experiencing COVID from different lived experiences. And I feel like this is now what we've got a real opportunity to continue to build upon, to imbue those that where we may see gaps, because this is going to be the next level of not only a productive citizen, but also a well-trained workforce. It's those competencies. And I'm extremely excited to be a part of that in my role in working with global competencies. I'm really excited about the North Carolina Ports for Graduate and how those synergize. But I think that COVID really shined a light on that, because these competencies are also aligned to social emotional learning skills. And so they're going to be the skills that, as we're overcoming this mental health crisis, that our students are going to need to have, but are much better prepared, I believe, in developing those or continuing the development of those.
Yes, and it's interesting that industry's putting as one of their number one characteristics they want to see in a student coming into their industry is empathy and compassion. You didn't see that 10 years ago, right? You saw the ability to problem solve, the ability to work well with others, but they really got it during COVID that if you were compassionate and empathetic, you were a better leader. You were able to put yourself in the frame of these people around you and get more done. And I'm so excited to see that that was a positive outcome of COVID. How can new leaders, either new principals or even teachers or superintendents, how can they become a voice of courage in this generation to say, we're not going to go back to the way traditional school was because it didn't work for most of our children? How can they be a voice of courage for the future so that we can be better?
Yeah, and I think twofold here. First is be open to change. I mean, and it's so funny because I know that we had this mantra, it's like, beyond normalcy, because so many people were saying, man, I can't wait to get back to when things were normal.
Yep.
And the challenge was, why would we go back to the way things were when they were normal? Because they didn't always fit the needs of our students. And if COVID did anything, it shined a light on that. It shined a light on many inequities in access and opportunity, whether that be broadband access and digital teaching and learning skills, whether that's access to nutrition. And so my challenge would be, why go back to normal? Let's go beyond normalcy. Let's look at where we had success, where we can celebrate, where we saw triumph, and amplify those. And I think that takes time, but that also takes, as you were saying earlier, that asset-based problem-solving mindset that we had to flip really quickly because we were constantly trying to solve problems, and to now where we actually have a little more time and we can be a little more intentional in that strategy and that process, but move beyond normal now as we're serving our students. And the second one, I think it relies on just flexibility. Flexibility in our work environments, flexibility in the way that we see what it means to be a classroom teacher, what it means to be a student, and in many cases, what it means to be a leader. There's in West Oxford, Granville County, there's a principal there who is just doing 5-minute staff meetings at the beginning of each week, because she realized like the power of having that face-to-face 5 minute, but also, I can send emails or I can record and send out a video if there's other things that I need to get a point across, instead of maybe having an hour and a half long staff meeting at the end of a long and trying day, when teachers still got to put their grades in and grade and get their classrooms back and organized. And I was like, what a brilliant, just like flip. It's like, I want to make sure we have 5 minutes face to face, but I want to value your time and these other ways I can develop strategies to get you the information that I need you to get in ways that don't require that old kind of hour and a half long faculty meeting. And so I just think the flexibility in looking at education from a myriad of lived experiences, and how we now are more attuned to those and build out strategies, I think are two ways that I would say we've learned a lot. Now let's apply that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're right. From Edgecombe to Wake to Hickory to Davie County to Ashe County, all of these districts, they're all doing something really cool and great for children that we can learn from. That's
Yes.
one of our favorite things, is to try to go visit from innovative leaders. And I say, okay, in Edgecombe, you were doing great things with micro schools during the pandemic, and we started a micro school. Kathy
Mhm.
and Wake was doing some pretty awesome things with getting kids back to school and thinking through transportation. We ended up with the smart bus piece based on some of those conversations. So for new leaders, find those folks they're doing the job you're in, but they're better than you and you know it, and learn from them, because then you'll rise to that level and you'll get everybody there. That's how we can be better. The last thing I would say is respect for educators needs to be top notch in our country.
Yes.
That's going to be one of my personal goals, to elevate the voice of educators. This Voices of Courage, I hope, will make an impact as we present all across the country, to say, when everyone else went home, our educators went to work, and they do that every day. Even though it is our community's responsibility to make sure there's Wi-Fi in our communities, who started paying for hotspots in our communities? Our schools did,
Yeah.
because we know we can do a lot to help children be successful. So educators are the heroes. And
Yes.
how do we be better with helping everybody understand that? The first year of the pandemic, parents kept saying it. I mean, I got emails, texts, calls. I can't believe, in the first few months I've had to have my child at home, that teachers deal with this every day, and I only have 2 kids in my house.
Right.
You've got like 1,800 children, and so how do we elevate the voice of educators and be better with that, and get the respect that educators deserve? And I hope this Voices of Courage series will do a little bit of that. I think, Freebird, you've done that your entire career, elevating the voice from the classroom of the children and of the staff. So thank you so much for being here today. I would say, is there anything else you would want this audience to know about how to be a voice of courage for the future?
And you started this off, like, I love this idea of the COVID keeper, because you're right. Our kids are going to return to these spaces and these moments, and they're going to realize like who shepherded them through this. And it's our teachers in the classroom, it's our principals at the school level, it's our custodians and our bus drivers and our child nutrition staff. Like, all of them are COVID keepers. And I think as we think about this concept of being the hero of your own story, Like if everyone strives to do just that, and remember, whether or not it was a mentor that helped you along the way, or someone that gave you that great piece of advice or a resource when you really needed it. Like we ultimately can transcend any obstacle or challenge that's in front of us. And our teachers and our school staff do this on a day-to-day basis. They did it during COVID. They continue to do it. And remember that feeling that you just talked about, as when we lifted them up as heroes, nothing's changed. They're doing even harder work in some cases because a lot of what we saw and shine the light on has been exasperated. So I just want to continue to lift those stories up and celebrate the incredible and amazing work that our North Carolina public schools do on a day-to-day basis. It's the foundation of our future.
Well, thank you for being one of these heroes and one of these voices of courage.